Welcome to the show, Peter.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I just want to get right into it. I did a history show about you recently, so everybody has the backstory to your life and the things that you did leading up to getting into Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and the Yeti. Working with John Green, Renee DeHenden, Grover Krantz, you will ever be connected to those folks as one of the four horsemen of Sasquatchery. So I want to talk about some of the evidence that you've gotten the opportunity to examine and find over the years. So is there anything that stood out to you over the time that you were investigating this subject that you found yourself or that maybe somebody else found that you found to be very credible and important as far as the discovery of these creatures?
Now, do you want to talk about the Yeti or Bigfoot?
Let's talk a little bit about the Yeti skull that you got the opportunity to examine and what you thought about that and what do you think about that validity, and then let's move into some of the Sasquatch evidence.
All right. I was a tea planter in North India for 5 years, and every year we had a month off. When I had that month off, I would go into the Himalaya and look for the Yeti. And these were what you might call very small expeditions. They consisted of myself and a cook and a couple of porters. And we hiked a few miles each time, talking with villagers. And on one occasion, we found footprints, small 5-toed footprints that would fit something which the villagers told us was about 4 feet high, the Yeti, not anything like the Bigfoot. And I did 3 of those expeditions, and then I was contacted by Tom Slick, the Texas oil man, who wanted me to come to the States and look for Bigfoot. So I was retiring from my tea company, and at that time, so I came over to the States and went down to Texas and sat down with Tom Slick, and we looked at maps of the Pacific Northwest. And at first I was skeptical. A large, hairy primate in the Pacific Northwest. I was very skeptical. Then I looked at the maps of the Pacific Northwest, and it's twice the size of the Himalaya, twice the size or more, millions of acres up here, as you probably know. So we got into, Tom and I, a 3-year project into the Bigfoot, which came to an end when Tom died in an air crash, very sadly, October 1962. So I ran one big project for Tom Slick, who's based in Northern California. And then years later, after Tom had passed away, I was approached by a very wealthy man in Peoria. His name was Dave Ransberg. He has passed away. And we set up another project. This one was for 5 years. And we based it again in Northern California, then moved to Oregon. And we did a lot of research, had a lot of people working. We had officers, vehicles, a helicopter on call. It was a big project. It came to an end after 5 years with, again, us having seen some footprints, which is just about the only evidence, except for, of course, eyewitness reports. And I collected quite a few of those and put them into my book, The Hunt for Bigfoot, which was published some years ago.
Let's talk a little bit about that evidence. Let's talk, for example, about the Patterson-Gimlin film. 1967, they filmed what was purported to be this female Sasquatch crossing the sandbar in Bluff Creek. You've obviously seen that and you were involved in some level on looking at that film. Do you think that is the piece of evidence that has stood the test of time? What is your thoughts on the Patterson-Gimlin film and whether it's real or not? Do you believe that's a real creature?
We're talking about what we call the 1967 footage, shot by Roger Patterson, accompanied by Bob Gimlin. They were both cowboys, very unsophisticated. They rented a camera. They went down to Northern California, and they just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I think that footage is real for a number of reasons, for the research that's been done on it. I took a copy to Disney Studios years ago, and I sat down in one of their little theaters with the head of animation and 5 of his assistants, and we ran the footage. And they said, "Oh, that's great." We ran it again. They said, "All right, where was this made?" And I said, "It was made in Northern California by 2 amateurs." And they said, "Oh, no, this is incredibly sophisticated, incredibly." Now, obviously, there's no such creature, therefore it's faked, but it's incredibly well done. It was not done in the States. If it was done in the States, we would have done it. This was Disney Studios. And then since then, talking with Bob Gimlin, who up here in the Northwest is regarded as a man of integrity, known to many people. And that and other things convinced me that it's real. It's a huge creature. It's 7 foot tall. We were able to do measurements later, not long after the footage was shot, and compare those measurements with stumps and trees behind. The creature is 7 foot 4 inches, has a 42-inch stride, had 14-inch feet. These were the footprints, and very powerful, very muscular. And for instance, this was shot by cowboys using it as film, and they had no idea of anatomy. And yet this creature has buttocks, huge buttocks. And these are the muscles that we use to walk upright. I forget the actual scientific name, but you see these enormous muscles on this creature moving. The arms are swinging. It turns its head, teeth between its lips, ears. If I'm not going on and on about the film, let me sum up and say I think it's real.
There's been tons of other evidence and videos and photographs and castings of footprints, and all these things have been found throughout the decades. Is there anything else that sticks out to you as something that you see as credible evidence, in addition to the Patterson-Gimlin film, the 1967 film, that these things are real?
We found footprints 5 times across the years, and this is going back across 60 years. 5 times only, but they were in remote areas. Now, a faker goes out to make a fake footprint. He goes behind his house, or he walks down the road, or maybe he drives 5 miles. The footprints we found were 30, 40 miles back, a place that a faker does not go. If for any other reason, that the footprints are not going to be found. So the footprints we found were very real. They were all close to 14 inches, 5-toed, with a kind of a slight bulge behind the right toe, we notice. And we have casts, of course, still, after all these years, we have some casts from those days. So the footprints, and then if you want some of the other evidence, you go back to Native American evidence. And the earliest I have is from 7 to 17 in a newspaper talking about some Native Americans capturing one. And then all through the 1800s, miners and settlers coming in, many stories which, to me, are very credible. Right up to the present day, state policemen, even a high court judge in Oregon here, tell me about what they saw and give me their reports. Those things, the history, the 1967 film, and the footprint finds. And then some things I've seen myself. All of these things add up to credibility of the creatures actually being here. Not so many as there might have been years ago, because in the 60s, we found footprints like twice in 1 year, and now we go 10, 20 years, and there's nothing. There is one thing that recently came up, and I'll tell you what it is, because it's worth telling. 2 years ago, 2020, June, 7 loggers were working in northern Oregon here, way back. They were about 10 miles back in the woods. And it was a closed area. It was gated by the people who were leasing it from the Forest Service. And they gate those areas because of insurance. They don't want people wandering in, getting hurt, then there are insurance problems. So it was gated. So these 7 men were working with some machinery, and one of them looks up, sees a man walking down the road. So he says, "Who's that?" Because there are no other men in the area, only these 7 men. So all 7 stop work. And here is a Bigfoot walking towards them from about 300 yards away. And they said it was, I've interviewed 3 of them. They said it was 7 feet tall, they guessed. It was dark brown in color, walking upright, swinging its arms. It looked enormous. When it came up to about 100 yards away from them, it stopped, turned away, and went into the woods. Where it was walking was very short grass and tree stumps, so their sighting of it was very clear. So that's something of great interest to people in the Bigfoot field. We call it the 7-man sighting from June 2 years ago.
Let's talk a little bit about sightings because this is what this show is really all about. I started this show to document as many encounter stories as I possibly could. I'm in the southeastern United States in North Carolina. So I started with those kind of stories, and then I've worked my way, and I've talked to people in the United Kingdom that have claimed to have had sightings of these things. So let's talk a little bit about some of the reports that you've taken. What do you think about these things being seen everywhere, down in Florida, here in North Carolina, and of course in the Pacific Northwest? How many of these reports do you think are actually credible? I know it's tough to put a number on it, but what do you think as far as credible reports? Do you think it's 10%? Do you think it's even more than that? Because I struggle sometimes with them being seen in some of the areas that people claim and purport to see these things.
Those of us who've been in the search for a very long time, we have a saying about where these things may be found, and that is west of the Rockies. And that includes the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, Oregon, British Columbia, right up to the Alaskan border. But in the States here, west of the Rockies, that's it, and nowhere else.
That's interesting, but I hear, and I've even experienced things here in North Carolina that I can't explain, but I haven't seen anything. When you get those reports from what appear to be credible people, it's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff because these people are very sincere when they're telling their stories. That's one of the things that make this so unbelievable for the skeptical people and even cynical people, is that people are seeing these things in places that they couldn't or wouldn't exist, even if they were real.
People see things when they're driving, they see a shape, perhaps they see shadows. If they're into the Bigfoot mystery, if they have an interest or read the books, they misinterpret what they see. And very honestly, there'd be no reason for me to say, oh, there's none in North Carolina, there's none in Texas, other than our studies. And my studies go back 60 years now. I've written 2 books. There's one fairly recently. First one was called The Search for Bigfoot. And then I upgraded it to The Hunt for Bigfoot, which I published a couple of years ago. In these studies, interviews with people, what we come down to, and once again, if I'm not repeating myself, is west of the Rockies.
You've been doing this, and you've clearly been in this for 6 decades, over 6 decades now. I guess
Yes.
It comes down to, I've had conversations with people like Dr. Jeff Meldrum when he was on the show, and I asked him about population and what he thought the population could possibly be in the northern United States, to include Canada and the Pacific Northwest. What do you think is a ballpark as far as what kind of numbers we're talking with these things currently as it is today in 2022?
Nobody knows. I've gone over this before with other people. Nobody knows. 1 left or 1,000. Nobody knows. And no way of knowing. We might capture one day and teach it English, and it could talk, and ask it, okay, how many of you are there? No, I'm getting rather glib there. But the answer there, I've heard people say 3,462. Nobody knows how many. I will say one thing, that there are less and less reports across the years. And because of that, I think these things might be diminishing, like the Yeti. Going back to the Yeti for a moment, I think the Yeti is extinct. And the reason for that is we're going into something like 45, 50 years now, and there's not been a single footprint or a single sighting of the Yeti. Just like when I was in the Himalaya, in the country of Nepal, across the years I was there, 2 animals disappeared, completely disappeared. One was a small leopard called the clouded leopard, and they're gone, completely gone. Our Bigfoot could be diminishing in numbers. And then if I'm not repeating myself as to actual numbers, nobody knows.
The question is always hanging in the air for me, and I ask this of people on my show often, so I'll ask it of you. Why do you think it is, after all these years, and you in the search for yourself for 60 plus years now, why is it that you think we don't have definitive proof that these things actually exist? Why haven't we been able to find them?
Because the science demands a body on the table, and that's the answer. Stories of sightings, stories of sounds, roars and screams and yells, stories of footprint finds, some of them not credible. They're no good. And the best photographs that you can reproduce in color, you know what can be done with computers, I'm sure. When it comes down to it, and I've worked with several scientists, and what they demand is physical evidence, a body on the table, if you like to say, and no physical evidence has ever been found. No hairs have ever been found. No bones, no tissues, no bodies, nothing has ever been found. People say they have this, they have that, but they don't. So there isn't there. The physical evidence is what is demanded by scientists, and they don't have it. And until they get it, Bigfoot is what? A myth, a joke, fun.
I definitely want to be respectful of your time. And as we close out, I just want to give you the last word. You've been doing this for so long, and you've been in this search for the majority of your life. What do you want to leave the audience with as far as thoughts on Bigfoot, the evidence, the search, anything you've experienced? What is the last word for you on solving this enigma that we're all trying to solve as far as Sasquatch is concerned?
What we hope, all of us, as we move along in years, is that a body will be found, one that is died of natural causes, not one that's been shot. And if a body is found, then the scientists will suddenly change their minds, and huge institutions like the Smithsonian may start putting people into the field. So what we hope for is that the best thing that we can think of to prove the thing is a body that is died of natural causes.
In this age of computer databases, space travel, and diminishing frontiers, many find it hard to believe that some things may exist without humans knowing about them. But some believe in the unknown and seek it out, no matter what the consequences. Tonight, we look at a Northwest legend that goes back farther than just about any other. Northwest Report's associate producer Sven Harhoff found out that even some people with academic credentials have become Bigfoot believers.
Legends of Bigfoot have been around the Northwest more than 100 years. The Indians who lived here before Lewis and Clark made carvings of creatures that some say represent the earliest sightings of Sasquatch.
And we have one very exciting sighting from this year.
It might walk over one of these open fields here.
Modern-day investigators want to find a Bigfoot for varied reasons.
I have not seen one, at least not to my knowledge. I've heard one, at least I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And once I smelled what was probably a Sasquatch.
Washington State University anthropology professor Grover Krantz has been recognized as an authority on evidence of Bigfoot. But he knows the academic world needs more than footprints and film.
They need proof, they need tangible evidence, a skull on the table. Short of that, it doesn't exist. And that's absolute.
Krantz tells Northwest Reports he sees a clear way to prove Bigfoot's existence.
Go out and shoot one.
I think that's wrong. I think it's very wrong. In fact, I think it's criminal, just about.
Peter Byrne, a big game hunter turned naturalist, looks for Bigfoot with little more than a camera. He says his research project is a benign operation.
I think it's very wrong to say shoot one to prove that it's there, and we're very much against that.
Byrne runs what he calls the Bigfoot Research Project out of a house in Parkdale, Oregon, on the road to Mount Hood.
We're fairly satisfied that the things are there, and basically what we're doing, in a nutshell, is gathering all of the information and putting it into a computer against a prepared database and looking for patterns. Then when we find these patterns, we will apply technical equipment in various forms.
The 5-year project got funding from a Massachusetts-based scientific group.
The present project is a year old. We started in August of last year. Yeah, I've been in and out since 1960, which is 33 years, not on a full-time basis. I did 10 years in the 70s, from 1970 to 1979, and that was full-time. But since then, I've been in and out of it, giving it what time I can in the search.
In the 50s, Byrne joined organized searches for Yeti, or the abominable snowman, in Asia's Himalaya mountains. The sponsors of those expeditions asked Byrne if he would help find a similar creature in the United States.
And I have to admit I laughed at the time. I thought it was very amusing that something like this, like an abominable snowman, could exist in the United States. So I came over in 1960 and spent a year and got bitten by the bug, if you like.
Byrne searched without success. After a year, he left the country, but returned shortly thereafter to make Oregon the headquarters for his Bigfoot search.
Well, tell me about this bug. What is it that fuels the fire that leads to all these projects?
I think it's the challenge in this particular respect of the unknown. The possibility that if these things are truly there, that we're looking at something that's, shall we say, almost still living in the primordial world. We think these things are human in form, a hominid form. We don't think they're animals.
Fact of the matter is, this is not an animal that's somewhere between ape and human. It is flat-out ape.
An older man with his dog were out here, and they encountered one.
Krantz developed his Bigfoot interest during his teenage years.
When I became a professional anthropologist, I realized that if this thing is real, it's very important in my field. Even if it isn't real, it's indirectly important because it's a piece of folklore that's really weird. So I felt that I couldn't honestly just ignore it. I had to find out for sure, one way or the other. So I looked into it, and to my satisfaction, I did find out for sure.
Krantz says the most compelling evidence supporting the existence of Bigfoot are footprints. Hundreds of footprints found all over the region. Many of them are faked, but not all, says Krantz.
So if even one of those wasn't faked?
Yeah. You don't need half, you don't need 1%, you just need one.
Meaning?
One real one. And then you know that the species is real.
And what's the likelihood of at least one of these being real?
Guaranteed.
So Krantz is convinced. He even suggests Sasquatches may be an endangered species and that they may need our help. But you can't help what you can't find. Bigfoot believers have yet to convince the scientific community or the public. And they know that the only way to stop the ridicule they face is to produce indisputable evidence.
And I've stuck my neck out very flatly on this, that the only way you're going to prove it exists is to bring in a body or a piece of a body. You don't have to ask me, ask any scientist, any skeptic, and they'll tell you the same thing. They need proof, they need tangible evidence.
Krantz says the most likely way to find a dead Sasquatch is to kill one.
If somebody goes out and shoots one, brings in the body or a substantial part of it, then the party's over. It's done. It's proven. The scientific world will have to acknowledge it.
Would you like to capture one?
No, we're against the idea of capture.
So you'd like to track? I mean, you'd like to find or...
We'd like to find one, confront one if you like, and see if it's possible to communicate.
So you'd like to give Peter Byrne a gun instead of a camera?
Yes. Peter Byrne and his camera is never going to prove them. He may make himself a nice name if he gets some good film of it, but he's never going to prove it to the skeptics. The skeptics will look at everything he gets, the best he can possibly get, and they will say, fake. They've said that to Patterson's film, they'll say it to Peter Byrne. There's no way you can prove it with anything but a body.
On October 20th, 1967, Yakima, Washington resident Roger Patterson and his buddy Robert Gimlin reportedly encountered a Sasquatch while hunting for Sasquatch evidence.
Second only to the footprints, I would class the Patterson film as the most powerful evidence.
The two men were on horseback in Northern California when they discovered this creature crouching beside a creek. Their presence alarmed the creature, which allegedly stood up and walked away. The sighting spooked Patterson's horse, which reared and fell over backward on top of him. About 20 seconds lapsed before Patterson grabbed his 16mm camera and started filming. Patterson kept rolling until he ran out of film. According to Krantz, the encounter was over in less than 2 minutes, and Patterson shot 952 color frames of what many say is a real Sasquatch. Krantz analyzed the film frame by frame. He reports no evidence of fakery, though he says he believes Patterson may have faked the film if he had the opportunity to do so. Krantz says no one has ever bothered to disprove the film.
Analyzing the creature in the film as to the idea that, well, it's just a big man in a fur suit. There is no man that can be fitted into a suit that gives those body proportions. The only way you could put a man in a suit is get a man 6.5 feet tall, to walk in a slouch, but break his arm right about in the middle of the upper arm so that you give him a fake shoulder there. And I don't think anyone would have done that.
Though no one has captured a decent image of a Bigfoot on film or tape since Patterson, reports of sightings and fresh footprints continue to reach Bigfoot-seeking organizations. Many of the sightings occur at night, something on the side of a road caught briefly in the headlights of a passing car. Fewer sightings take place in the dense northwest forests.
About 56, I guess. I was working up Hill Creek Canyon logging.
Furman Osborne says he saw a huge hairy creature up close and personal one sunny morning.
Osborne was working as a logger in Oregon's Hood River National Forest. He and his colleagues were taking a break in the shade one day when a Bigfoot-like creature allegedly appeared.
Here come this big thing out of powder brush, took up through there. It looked to be about 7 feet tall, big, tall, long, hairy legs, and it stood upright, but it had a real big, broad shoulders drooped over, you know, monster. It looked sort of like a man, it looked like a beast. And it was a big thing. I'd say it's 6, 7 feet tall. And it weighed several hundred pounds.
Osborne followed the creature to get a better look. He says it quickly headed toward thick scrub.
He didn't run, he just walked real fast, like big long strides.
Osborne says he threw some rocks at it in hopes of getting it to turn and show its face. It did not, and that was the last time Osborne ever saw such a creature.
So you do believe that there are creatures out there?
Yeah, well, I know there are creatures of some kind because I saw it and I was close to it, but what it was, I'll never know about.
Perhaps none of us will ever know for sure if Sasquatch-like creatures exist. For some, it might be the search for the unknown that makes the Bigfoot mystery so intriguing. But not so for Krantz. He wants the hunt to end, and end fast.
My reputation in straight science has suffered very badly for this, and I would feel very vindicated if the search is ended successfully.
As for Peter Byrne, he still has 4 years of funding for his search. He can't say what he'll do after that, though he gives no indication he'll give up the search.
So you never tire? I mean, you don't get up in the morning someday and say, this is the last thing that I want to do is...
No, I get up in the morning and say, this is the day I may find Bigfoot.
I really appreciate your time. I know your time is valuable, and I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and experience. It's been a blast talking to you. I really appreciate you coming on.
All right. My pleasure. Glad to help.